Have you ever felt a shift in the air? The second you walked into a room, you didn't say anything. You weren't rude, but still, something changed. A glance, a pause, a quiet tension that didn't make sense. Most people would assume, did I do something wrong? But the truth is, you didn't offend them. You didn't cross any lines. You didn't break any rules. You simply exist, without needing their approval. And for some people, that's more than they can handle. Your calmness, it reminds them they're unsettled. Your confidence, it reveals their doubt. Your silence, it echoes louder than their noise. You're not trying to outshine anyone. You're just not dimming yourself to fit in. And that reflection of strength, control, stillness, reminds them of everything they haven't mastered. They don't hate you. They hate what they feel about themselves. When you're near, you become the mirror. And what they see in that mirror makes them uncomfortable. That's not arrogance. That's emotional projection. And it happens far more than we like to admit. You didn't create their resentment, but you do trigger it. So if you've ever felt that quiet tension, that unspoken resistance, you're not imagining it. Let's break it down clearly, calmly, and without apology. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to dominate the room. You don't have to prove a single thing. And yet people notice. People react. People shift around you. It's not because you're loud. It's not because you're demanding. It's because you carry something they don't understand, and often don't have. You move through the world with a calm that's unshaken. You don't need to perform. You don't need to chase attention. You don't need to be liked to be secure. And that alone, without you doing anything, makes some people feel deeply uncomfortable. Why? Because your very existence highlights their internal noise. Your silence exposes how loud their mind is. Your confidence makes their insecurity unbearable. It's not that you said anything wrong. You might have been polite, quiet, respectful, but your non-neediness, your ability to stay grounded while others are spinning, feels like a direct threat to someone who hasn't built that same foundation. They see your stillness, and they don't know what to do with it, because they only know how to connect through chaos, noise, drama, or validation. You are not arrogant. You are not cold. But because you don't over-explain, because you don't seek their approval, because you can sit in your own presence without fidgeting, they label you. They call it pride. They call it ego. They call it too much. But what they're really describing is their own discomfort around someone who doesn't need anything from them. You don't match their frequency, and instead of rising, they resent you for not lowering yourself. That's how projection works. They don't say, I feel insecure when I'm around you. They say, you're full of yourself, not because you are, but because they're empty of something, and they don't want to admit it. The more grounded you are, the more unsettled they feel. And that's not your problem to fix. It's not your job to make others comfortable by shrinking. Your energy speaks before you do. And for those who haven't met themselves honestly, that energy can feel like an attack. But it isn't. It's just presence, real presence. And that's rare and threatening in a world built on performance. But here's where it gets even more personal. Sometimes it's not just what you represent, it's who you remind them of. Not every reaction you get is about you. In fact, some of the strongest reactions you'll ever face have nothing to do with your actions and everything to do with someone else's unprocessed pain. You walk into a room calm, present, self-assured, and suddenly someone's energy shifts. They turn cold, dismissive, defensive, even hostile, and you're left wondering, what did I do? But that's the wrong question, because chances are You didn't do anything. You just exist in a way that stirs something they've been trying to bury. You remind them of someone they never forgave, someone who once made them feel powerless, unseen, disrespected. Maybe it's the tone in your voice, the way you hold eye contact, the way you don't chase, the way you don't react. You represent the same energy that hurt them, but with none of the intention. Or maybe you don't remind them of another person. Maybe you remind them of a version of themselves they can't stand to remember, a version that gave up, stayed small, chose comfort over courage. And now, watching you walk in with composure, with direction, with something they never built, triggers guilt they've been avoiding for years. This is what we call emotional transference. It's not rational, it's not fair, but it's human. You become a placeholder for their pain, a symbol of their story, even if you've never read a single page of it. And from that moment on, they start reacting to you based on the pain someone else caused. They assign you motives you don't have. They attach stories to your silence. They assume you're cold, distant, arrogant, when in reality, you're just centered. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. You didn't create the wound. You just happened to stand where it was bleeding. That reaction, it's not about your truth. It's about their history. And it's not your job to fix that. It's not your burden to carry. But it is your responsibility to see it clearly so you don't absorb it or internalize it. Because when you understand what's really going on, you stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" And you start recognizing, that pain doesn't belong to me. And here's the thing, even without that kind of trauma, sometimes all it takes is one moment, one misread glance, one wrong tone, and suddenly you're seen as someone you're not, and they never bother to see you differently again. It doesn't take much. A glance held 1 second too long. A tone they misinterpreted. A moment where you didn't say what they expected you to say. That's all it takes. And they make a decision. This is who you are. They don't ask. They don't clarify. They don't revisit the moment. Because for some people, it's easier to jump to conclusions than it is to sit with curiosity. It's easier to judge quickly than to listen carefully. They assign you a role based on fragments, based on projection, based on what they would have meant if they were the one who acted like you. And once the label is applied, that's it. You're arrogant. You're cold. You're too intense. You think you're better. You're hard to talk to. You're standoffish. They create a version of you that's easier for them to manage, easier to contain. Because the truth, you unsettle them. And instead of asking why, they shut the file. They stop updating the story. They stop watching the full picture. Because updating it might require them to change their mind. And let's be honest, some people would rather be consistent than correct, especially when your presence challenges the stories they tell themselves about power, status, emotional control. So they make up a story that explains you in a way that makes them feel safe. You become difficult because you don't overshare. You become intimidating because you don't break eye contact. You become untrustworthy because you don't chase their validation. But none of it is truth. It's a shortcut, a defense mechanism, an emotional convenience that protects their worldview. Here's what you need to understand. Once someone labels you, they rarely take the time to relearn you, especially if that first label made them feel smarter, superior, or secure. They prefer the version they invented, because the real you, that would take work to understand, and not everyone's willing to do that work. So what do? You stop trying to explain yourself. You stop handing out updates to people who only want to hold on to the first draft. You let your character speak louder than their assumptions, and you walk with the peace of someone who knows. Their opinion isn't my burden, it's their limitation. And the more different you are from their world, the calmer, the deeper, the more self-possessed, the more they assume you're the problem. You're not loud. You're not flashy. You don't need to announce your worth. And that's exactly why they feel threatened. You walk in with presence, not performance. You don't over-explain. You don't chase. You don't pretend. And in a world where most people are busy managing their image, your authenticity cuts through like a blade. You're not trying to impress. You're not trying to be liked. You're just being real. And that makes them deeply uncomfortable, because they've built a version of themselves around how they want to be seen, not who they truly are. And when you show up fully aligned, fully grounded in your truth, you disrupt the illusion they're trying to hold together. You become a threat to their performance, not because you criticize it, but because you don't need it. They joke to fit in. You stay silent. They flatter to gain favor. You speak when it matters. They avoid truth to avoid discomfort. You tell the truth even if it makes the room colder. And they feel it, even if they can't name it. Something about you feels off to them, not because you're fake, but because they are. You're not cold. You're just not controlled. Not by approval, not by image, not by the pressure to blend in. And when someone lives disconnected from themselves, being in the presence of someone who is connected feels almost unbearable. It reminds them of how much of their identity is borrowed, from expectations, from culture, from fear. They don't know who they are without the filters. And you don't wear any. So they judge you, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your stillness shakes what they've been faking. That's the cost of being real in a world full of masks. You won't always be loved, but you will always be free. But here's the thing. Sometimes the judgment doesn't even start with them. Sometimes the damage is done before you even arrive, thanks to someone else's words. By the time you walk into the room, someone else may have already been there, wearing your name. And no, not literally, but through whispers, through suggestions, through stories they told about you, before you even had a chance to show who you are. Because rumors, they travel faster than facts. And most people don't need the truth. They just need something that feels true, something that fits their fears, something that matches their assumptions, something they can grab onto and spread like wildfire. And so they do. Maybe someone was jealous of your strength. Maybe someone didn't like that you didn't bend. Maybe someone felt small around you, and instead of facing that feeling, they poisoned the room before you ever stepped into it. They said, "She's cold, he's arrogant." They think they're better than everyone else. Just enough, just loud enough, just subtle enough to shape perception. And here's where it gets worse. Once someone believes a version of you, they start looking for proof. Confirmation bias kicks in. They filter everything you do through that lens. You stay quiet? See, aloof. You speak directly? See, rude. You don't play along with their fake small talk? See, unapproachable. It doesn't matter if it's true. They've already decided who you are. And now their ego is attached to defending that decision. Because admitting they were wrong would require humility. And most people prefer to be consistent than corrected. So what can you do? Nothing. Not directly. Because explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you is a waste of energy and dignity. Instead, you hold your frame. You let your actions contradict the rumors without trying to fix the impression, because truth doesn't need to argue. It just needs time. And if someone is mature enough, they'll eventually see the difference between the rumor they believed and the person standing right in front of them. If not, you let them keep their fiction, while you keep your freedom. Still, even without gossip, sometimes all it takes to be hated is to be steady in a world full of people falling apart. You don't react like they expect. You don't chase. You don't flinch. And that alone is power most people don't understand. Because most people live in emotional chaos. They're constantly reacting to opinions, to noise, to drama. They need reassurance. They need attention. They need people to notice them, validate them, manage their self-esteem. But you don't need any of that. You move with intention. You speak with restraint. You stay calm in rooms where everyone else is performing. And that calmness, that inner discipline, it exposes everything they've failed to develop within themselves. You embody emotional control, the kind that's earned, the kind that's built through silence, solitude, setbacks, and they know it. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. Your presence reveals the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. You're not trying to dominate, but you're not giving up your ground either. And that neutrality, that quiet strength, feels like a threat to people who only know how to connect through chaos. You don't need to control them, but they can't control you. And in a world where so many social dynamics rely on unspoken control, that makes you dangerous, because you're not emotionally available for manipulation. You don't take the bait. You don't flinch when they push your buttons. You don't respond to guilt, shame, or pressure. You've already done that work, the internal cleanup. So now, when they try to provoke you, all they hit is stillness, and that stillness drives them mad, because it means they have no access, no leverage, no power. They can't draw you into drama. They can't trigger a reaction. They can't get you to bend. You've built a kind of presence that stands on its own, without applause, without permission, without performance. And nothing threatens a chaotic person more than someone they cannot move. But what really drives them mad isn't just that you're steady. It's that you're not even competing, and somehow you're still winning. You're not trying to be seen. You're not trying to win them over. You're not trying to rise in anyone's social ranking. You're just being present, grounded, clear. And yet, you get noticed. You get respect. You get attention. Not because you asked for it, but because people are drawn to what doesn't chase. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. You're not trying to win a game you never agreed to play. You've stepped off the board. You've stopped performing. You've let go of the need to be chosen, approved, or liked. And ironically, that's exactly what makes you magnetic. You walk into a room without seeking validation, and suddenly, you become the most validated person there. Why? Because you carry something rare, freedom from outcome. You don't dress to impress. You don't speak to dominate. You don't posture to intimidate. You move through life by your own code, your own pace, your own frame. And people who are locked into image, status, and ego can't stand it. They're exhausting themselves trying to win, and you're not even keeping score. They're performing, and you're just breathing. They're addicted to attention, and you're perfectly fine in silence. It doesn't compute. It disrupts the script. And here's the paradox. The less you seek, the more you receive. The less you speak, the more they listen. The less you play, the more they feel like they're losing. That's not your fault. That's what happens when someone sees you winning without needing to dominate. And it shakes them, because it means everything they're chasing might not be necessary at all. And that truth, It's threatening, because if you can have presence without chasing status, respect without pandering, peace without approval, then their entire game becomes pointless. And rather than face that, they label you. And when they realize they can't influence you, can't pressure you, can't get inside your frame, their final move is to call you difficult. They had a version of you in their mind before you even opened your mouth. They expected someone more agreeable, more submissive, more predictable, someone who would make them feel comfortable, validated, important. But that's not who you are. You didn't play along. You didn't bend to their unspoken expectations. You didn't perform. And that's when the discomfort began. Because people don't resent what they understand. They resent what they can't control. What they can't predict. What doesn't follow the script. See, most social interactions run on silent contracts. You act this way, so I can stay in control. You react this way, so I feel safe. But when you break that contract without even trying, you become a glitch in their social code. You stay silent when they expect you to explain. You hold eye contact when they expect you to look down. You disagree calmly when they expect compliance. And suddenly, you're not confident to them. You're arrogant. You're intimidating. You're hard to read. But the truth is, you're not hard to read. You're just not easy to manipulate. And that makes you dangerous in their eyes. Because they wanted control, not connection. They don't hate you because of who you are. They hate you because you refused to be who they needed you to be. You broke the frame. And when someone loses control over the narrative, their ego doesn't go quietly. It fights back with judgment, gossip, resentment. But here's what you must remember. You are not responsible for the version of you they created in their head. You're not here to fit their expectations. You're here to live in alignment, not in submission. They wanted a character in their story. You chose to be the author of your own. And in a world where control equals comfort, authenticity will always be misread as rebellion. So when they realize they can't shape you, can't steer you, can't use you to serve their image, their last reaction is resentment disguised as judgment. Most of what you think is hate isn't hate at all. It's discomfort. It's projection. It's fear wrapped in judgment. It's insecurity disguised as criticism. And the truth is, it was never about you. It was about the storm they're still battling inside. The image they're trying to protect. The version of themselves they haven't made peace with. You simply became the mirror. And mirrors, they don't lie. They don't judge. They just reflect. You didn't trigger their hate. You triggered their truth. And some people aren't ready to face it. So they blame you, distance themselves from you, talk about you, label you, misunderstand you on purpose. Because understanding you would require them to reconsider everything they've built their identity on. But here's what you need to remember. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're not here to make people feel comfortable. You're here to move in alignment, not approval. Let them carry their judgment. Let them carry their stories. Let them misunderstand you if it means you get to stay true to yourself. Because the most powerful response to silent resentment, false narratives, and projection isn't fighting back. It's not explaining. It's not proving. It's this. Remain calm. Stay unreadable. Be unbothered. Let your stillness make the noise. Let your presence do the talking. Let your peace be the reminder that you don't have to react, to be in control. There is strength in silence. There is dominance in detachment. And there is power in walking away without a word. So the next time you feel that quiet tension in the room, that shift in energy, that cold reaction without a cause, Remember this, they don't hate you. They just don't know how to handle what you represent. And that's not yours to solve. If this message spoke to you, comment stillness below. Let them keep guessing. You stay grounded.